Oh, sorry, I have to do this again. Sound. Okay, so in this last unit, you had a couple of readings and a couple of authors you had to look at: Cam McPherson, Jean Kilbourne, Marshall McLuhan. So these people that you had to read about, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of background if I haven't provided enough, or if you didn't pick up any in the course itself. Cam McPherson is actually, I think he's still teaching, but he's an Ontario teacher who designed the media literacy component of the English program here in Ontario. And he's going to talk about, in this video that I'm going to show you, he's going to talk about why students need to analyze media, why it's so important for the media. Another video I might show you if we have time is the idea of Marshall McLuhan, who is a Canadian from the 90s. He's dead now, but he's a researcher. I might have mentioned it earlier. But during his time, he coined a phrase, medium is the message, which basically talks about the idea of it's not just the radio or the TV that communicates a message, it's also the TV and the radio that communicates a message. For example, it's not just the messages that are on the cell phone that communicate a message, it's also the cell phone. The cell phone can represent a status item, it can represent a technological item, it could represent a smartphone versus an old school phone, it could represent rich versus poor, popularity, right? If you have an Apple phone, those kinds of things. So it's not just the phone message, it's also the phone itself. So it's the technology. So that's Marshall McLuhan. And then Jean Kilbourne, she wrote this article about people of products, but if we have time, I want you to watch short explanations that she has about why kids need to study literacy as well, similar to Cam McPherson. And then she also talks about female representation in advertising and how we as a society need to be careful going forward, because advertising up to this point has always played up the ideal representations of certain people, how women should look, how men should act, how minorities or people of color look in advertising, how females are supposed to buy certain things in advertising. And she talks about how we have to be careful, especially with the idea of female representation. So let's just watch a couple of videos and I'll stop and start, but they're not long. Here, Cam McPherson, this is an old video, but he's actually here, as I told you, he's teaching in Ontario, but he's talking about why studying the media is important.
Everything will reinforce everything else. And we're hoping that by making people more critical of electronic media, they'll become more critical of other things, such as their own cultural habits, their own popular culture, but also the books they read as well. And that this will make students not just consumers of media and people who are often required to memorize and regurgitate factual information, but they'll become much more critical of the things schools are doing to them and the things they do to their own lives. So that we don't see electronic media as divorced from print. Ultimately, we'd like to integrate the two. And this is often a selling job. Parents, school officials, students themselves often see print as the superior literacy, the real purpose of school. And electronic media.
So, that's a logical argument there, that a lot of people think textbooks, tests, paper-based studies are superior ways of studying. Now, here in the age of online learning, pandemic or no pandemic, initially when online teaching started maybe 10, 15 years ago, people didn't take it seriously. They thought it wasn't real learning. But if you look at it now, especially with everybody studying online, it really has taken over the book and the textbook. I mean, there are many people who still use textbooks. And as somebody who teaches college, for example, or university, many students don't want to buy textbooks. When I was in university, you would have to spend maybe $400 to $1,000 every year buying books, paper books. It was a business. And then you had to carry all these books everywhere, right? So, but I think that's changed now. Students prefer to have ebooks or things that they can read on their laptops or tablets. They don't want to carry the heavy books. Also, the printed books are expensive. Also, the environment, right? The books, making a book is not, unless you're using recycled works or papers, which doesn't always happen, is a lot of stress on the environment.
Media literacy is strictly kind of a minor little adjunct that doesn't have a lot of weight. We want to try and change that notion, and we hope that the critical thinking skills they get in one area will carry over to the other area.
So what he's actually arguing with here is that because if we encourage students to study more electronically and why they're studying certain things, for example, this unit on the media gets you to think about what you're studying, right? Yes, you're studying advertising. Yes, you're studying people as products, but these are things that actually affect you every day. Whereas for example, if you're studying math and you're doing the quadratic equation, or you're doing geometry, those kinds of things, certain kind of topics won't necessarily appear in your future. Whereas in advertising will most definitely appear in your future. When you have your own kids and they want to buy something because they saw it on their laptops or they saw it on TV, the quadratic equation is not something you're going to see every day as you're going to work or taking the subway, right? Though what he's saying here is that the electronic age or the media age, this video is from like 1990s, the electronic age and encouraging Ontario students to think more is the wave of the future. Let's talk about Marshall McLuhan for a second. Just a little bit of an overview of who he is and what he did. Or actually, you know what? Let's move on to tie in with Jean.
We all know what literacy is, that it's the ability.
Jean Kilbourne is going to connect her message to Cam McPherson's idea of literacy. And literacy is the idea of reading and writing. You hear it all the time. But she's going to talk about media literacy, meaning reading, writing, and understanding the media and why it's important for people of your generation. You read her article, The People as Products. So this is what she looks like in real life.
We all know what literacy is, that it's the ability to read, the ability to write. Media literacy is the ability to process and understand and create media. So it's the ability to, for example, deconstruct a commercial and understand what's being sold and what techniques are being used in that commercial. It's also understanding about the power behind the media. Who controls the news, for example? Who decides what's news and what isn't? A media literate person would understand that there's a huge concentration of ownership of the media in our country. 95% of all the information that we get, all of the movies we see, the books we read, the articles, everything, 95% of it is controlled by only 5 major corporations.
So she's talking about the United States, but I think this is a worldwide phenomenon. But there's basically only 5 companies that control all of the news, all of the movies, all of the music, etc. There's only 5 of them. Even though there's 10,000 different artists and 10,000 different movies and all those things, there's only 5 companies that manage all of it. If you're thinking about Hollywood movies or movies that were, we used to watch when we were able to leave our houses. But yeah, if you think about that, only 5 major companies hold all the money for these movies.
These corporations are basically in the business of marketing. So a media literate public would really understand that and perhaps would demand better from these corporations. I think a media literate public would also not tolerate the kind of political advertising that we have in this country and that doesn't really exist in other countries, because people would be educated to be able to deconstruct it and to understand the sort of emotional manipulation that goes on in these kinds of ads, for example. So that's just one example of how media literacy would help us, not only as parents, but would help us as a democracy.
So she's also making the connection between media literacy, or why people need to study the media, relative to politics. The world is set up, especially nowadays, where everybody's advertising messages, whether you're on Instagram or Facebook, right? How many of us, if you do use social media, how many of the pictures do you see on social media are real life moments, or are they fabricated moments? How many of us look at social media and think, oh, I wish I had that life, but meanwhile, the person's Instagram page is mostly good lighting, good makeup, it's a fake picture, or it's not them, or those kinds of things, right? So we need to be aware, critically aware of what exists in the media. Okay, what I wanted to do, maybe we'll finish off a couple more videos next week, depending on the presentations, but I wanted to do our final little reflective Padlet. We can take a look at it now, and I can send you the link if you want to try it, but I just want you to reflect on one of the videos. I'm also going to post the videos in the course so you can watch them on your own, but I will watch them fully with you next week. But just reflect on one of the videos. What did you learn? Is media literacy important? And share any reflective thoughts. Aim for 200 words plus reflective images. And this is just, you know, you've done these before enough. You add your comment, add a picture, and just wrap up the media unit. And that'll be our final little Padlet activity for this course. I think the media, even though you're not going to study it in college and university, it might be something that you would want to consider, you know, especially if you are going to become parents later on, or if you are interested in the media too, like why things are being written, what kind of news stations do you follow, what kind of artists do you follow, who owns, you know, who are the 5 companies that put out all the music every year? Why does everybody think those award shows like the Oscars or the Grammys or those American shows are the kind of staple, or like the kind of best way to understand or see a movie? It's even like, I don't know, for music, if you're a music person, the idea of Billboard,